In today's video, I'm going to teach you everything you're ever going to need to know about answering behavioral interview questions. Behavioral interview questions are incredibly popular with people in HR and recruiting today, so you're going to need to know how to answer them. I'm going to talk about what they are, why they're asked, how you can go about answering them, and I'm going to give you an example on how to answer one at the very end of the video, so make sure you stay tuned. Let's go. Now first, what is a behavioral interview question? Now, it's an interview question in which they're asking you about a past experience and telling them what you did in that situation. So, as a rule of thumb, anytime they say, can you give me an example of a time when, or tell me about a time when you, and they ask you to specifically recall an event and what you did in that scenario, that is a behavioral interview question. So why are they asked? The simple answer is it allows them to get a glimpse into how you've behaved in the past. They're getting an example of what your behavioral response was to something that you encountered in your job. So they ask you about a specific scenario that it's very likely that you would have encountered, and then what you did, how you reacted, how you responded. It gives them an opportunity to see, okay, how did they handle this? What did they do? What are their behaviors? And also gives them an idea of how good you are at communicating things like complex situations that you've dealt with in the past. So now that you know what they are and why they're asked, let's talk about how you answer them. Now, anytime you get an interview question that starts with, tell me about a time when, or can you give me an example of a time when you, something along those lines, you want to use the STAR technique. Now that's situation, task, action, result. And what that is that's a framework to allow you to kind of talk about that in a kind of like a cohesive set pattern in which you can actually go through and explain everything clearly. One of the most challenging things about behavioral interview questions is you're asked a relatively complex question where you need to explain something. And if you don't have a plan, and if you don't have a methodology for going about answering them, it's really easy to forget the details, to get off track, to say things out of order. But if you're using the STAR method, it's going to allow you to go step by step and show them exactly what happened. Now, how long should this take you? I would say that most behavioral interview questions can be answered from 60 seconds to 120 seconds. So remember, you're laying the groundwork. This is a situation I was in. This is a task that I was responsible for handling. This is a specific action I took. And then result, here was the outcome of everything I did. Now, even on the most complex stories, 2 minutes is probably enough. If you're not at least taking like 45 seconds to a minute though, you're probably not going into as much detail. Whenever someone is asking you a behavioral interview question, they are expecting detail. They are expecting you to go in, talk about some of the specifics, some of the takeaways, specific actions, and what happened. So for just a general benchmark, between 45 seconds and 2.5 minutes, but for easy numbers, 1 to 2 minutes is usually safe for answering a behavioral interview question. Now, just an added note to that, it is really important to stay on track. People get passionate when they're talking about these questions because typically they're important moments in their career. Maybe they're big accomplishments. Maybe they're really stressful times. So people have a tendency to get off track, to ramble a little bit, or to deviate from that plan. It is really important when you're asked a behavioral interview question to follow those specific guidelines. So situation, task, action, result. Now the next tip I'm going to give you is I want you to add an L. Add an L to STAR. So situation, task, action, result, and lesson. One of the best things you can do when you're answering a behavioral question is end it by saying, and one of the things I really learned from this situation and that it's really important to blank. What you're doing there is you're not just showing this is how I handled it, it was appropriate, here was the outcome, but there was a takeaway for me. For me, there was a lesson, I learned this. You want to do that if it's applicable. If it wouldn't make sense to say you learned something, then don't do it. But if it was a challenging situation in which you were dealing with like a difficult customer, for example, there should absolutely be a takeaway. And by adding the lesson you learned, you're kind of going above and beyond answering their interview question and showing that you're the type of person to not just encounter tough things and succeed, but you're going to become better because of them because you're taking away information that's going to allow you to succeed in the future. So now I want to give you an example of exactly how you can go about answering a behavioral interview question. I'm going to ask to myself one of the most popular behavioral interview questions, and that is, give me an example of a time you dealt with a difficult customer. How did you handle it? This is absolutely something you can consider yourself most likely going to be asked if you were doing any sort of customer interaction, if you do any of that, and the interviewer is good at what they're doing. This is a question you might encounter. Now, I'm going to answer this as someone who is in recruiting and someone who does account management in recruiting, just because for me, that's easy to talk about, it's comfortable, but you can imagine this for you. So if you're working with customers, what I want you to do when this video is done is I'd like you to actually go over this and practice how you would answer it. But let's start with the first one. So we're doing the STAR method situation. So, recently in my last role, I was working with a brand new client, and this client was new to our model, and for them, they had some pretty steep expectations. One, they expected to be relatively inexpensive, so it to be a cheap service, and they wanted us to move really quickly and find them candidates fast. So that's the situation right there. This is the situation I was in, this is what was going on. So now let's move to T. So this is task. So while working with them, they want us to go out and identify, and it was going to be a junior accountant. But what we realized is that their market, what they were looking to pay this person was below market rate. So about a week into the search, we realized, okay, this is going to be a problem. They are paying less than the candidates that we are running into are expecting. We determined that going through in the same course of action was not going to be successful. So now is probably arguably the most important part of answering a behavioral interview question, and that's action. You're talking about the specific thing you did to rectify the situation. So it became clear to me that we weren't going to be able to succeed given the current parameters of the search. So what I did is I went to my team and I had them just kind of pull together some of the data from the candidates they'd spoken to. We also have access to a salary tool through my company. So I went in there and I pulled some information. Once we were able to compile all this information, I went to our client and I shared with them exactly what we were seeing in the market, the candidates we had spoken to, but then overall market data showing that they were a little bit below what candidates were looking for. And I let them know, doing what we're doing, I don't know if we're going to be able to accomplish your objectives. We're not going to be able to move quickly, and it's going to be more expensive because we are not going to be able to find someone given the salary range. Now, last is result, and you want to showcase here an outcome. So once we told that to them, we had a discussion about compensation. They went back, they talked a little bit about it. We connected again, and they said that they were going to be able to move it to a senior role, and they were going to be able to provide a more aggressive compensation range that would be more appealing to the type of candidates that we were targeting. That search actually ended up being really successful. We were able to identify someone within the next couple of weeks. We had a full slate of candidates interviewing, and ultimately they hired someone a little bit ahead of schedule. So the end result is they ended up being really happy, and we ended up working with them on several additional searches. And I would attribute that in part to the fact that we were able to go to them and bring them that market data. Now, L, so I want to talk about this. You could leave it there, and that is a great answer to this interview question, but you can also talk about lesson. So let's talk about that here. Now, the big takeaway for me after we finish this is just how powerful data can be when you're talking to clients. I had not experienced that much. This was not something I had encountered frequently, but in subsequent searches, I've been quick to leverage data when we have it if I need to build a case to help show our clients that we need to be doing something differently in order to be successful. So for me, that was a huge takeaway. So there you go. If you do those things, that paints a really compelling picture. It shows them exactly the situation, what had to happen, the result, the learning, all that. It is a really powerful way to answer the interview question. Now, that example that I gave you, unless you are like a recruiting manager or an account manager in recruitment, is probably not applicable to you, but you probably have a situation very similar. And if you go through it, you can probably build a similar structure with situation, task, action, result, and lesson. Now, if you've watched this, you're at the end of the video, but do me a favor. I'm gonna pull a video up right here. If you found this video valuable, you are gonna find this next one incredibly valuable. It's 5 different ways that you can be better than 97.5% of candidates. These are huge level 2, like 202 interviewing tactics that are going to up your game. I totally suggest you watch that. It is a great video. And if you're interviewing for a job right now, it's going to allow you to take your interviewing game to the next level.